Keynote. He has chosen to dedicate himself to educating people about safe operation, safe living in the outdoors. But unlike some people who simply say, hey, I'm going to do this, he started right from the beginning and said, what do people need to know? And he set up a plan, and he made himself truly an educational professional. So he said, this is how I can help people be as safe as possible, because this is the information they actually need. And I think he sets a great standard for those of us who teach, to make sure that we know what needs to be taught before we simply try teaching. And I think that's the mark of a true professional. I respect him so much for doing that. Bruce has been teaching for about 25 years or so. He's assisted Moores. He was a student of Moores at the University of Alberta, I believe. He spent time in the Canadian Armed Forces and in the reserves. And so he served both the broader community in terms of education and professionalism. He served our country as a veteran and as an active duty reservist. A truly class act, and a recent author of a book which I hope all of you will go home with from this weekend. So I'd like to welcome Bruce Zawalsky. Bruce, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, I don't know who that guy was he was introducing, but I'd like to meet him. Sounds cool, yeah. So guys, everybody enjoying the absolute best winter gathering in Canada so far? Yeah. So, yeah, that was good. I caught a little bit of David's presentation today, and it was just absolutely top rate, and it was really, really good. So with that, as different David, just mentioned, I am an author, and I also teach survival, but I think first and foremost that I have been an outdoor educator. And I've been an outdoor educator for a long time. The minute you start and take somebody out, you become an outdoor educator. In one way or the whether you do good, bad, or indifferent, that's still the same thing. And I started over 36 years ago when I guided my first hike as a hike master for Scouts Canada in the Canadian Jamboree in Kananaskis. And over the years, I've been a hiking guide, a telemark ski guide, a canoe guide. I was actually a dive instructor once, because I still am, a soldier. But for the last 24 years, I have taught survival, navigation, and wildlife and bear awareness, mostly with a specialization in instructing field workers in Western and Northern Canada. And I specialized because I needed to make a living. That's where I think we should make that, because I didn't really specialize because I got bored with canoeing in the Canadian Shield or hiking in the Rockies, right? There's lots of stuff we do that's really cool and fun, but I found that most of it doesn't pay very well. Right, so when you're working on your business plans, you might want to think about that along the way. So, tonight I want to tackle a couple issues, and I want to start with something which is what's in a name. Now, we call what we do here survival, wilderness survival, outdoor survival, bushcraft, northern bushcraft, modern wilderness survival, and I think about 10 or 15 other ones. The Americans are getting even worse, as somebody's claimed to have copyrighted bushcraft, and they're running around making new things up. So, first of all, I got a question for you. How many people here think that they practice bushcraft? Nobody? Some of you? Okay, great. So, with that, notice Morris didn't put up his hand. This is where you should be all scared, right? So, how many of you have been into Australia or New Zealand? Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So, out of the people that put your hand up, how many of you who've been to Australia or New Zealand did survival bushcraft training in Australia or New Zealand? Okay, so that means none of us practice bushcraft. I read a book about it once that Morris lent me on New Zealand, but that doesn't help you out, right? And so Morris got it absolutely right when he named his book properly, Northern Bushcraft, right? That's the name of the book. I don't care what everyone else says. There it is. That's the right name, right? And so really, we have two main schools of learning in Canada, wilderness survival and Northern Bushcraft. And I'd like to spend a little time tackling both these subjects. And I'll start with wilderness survival. So, skill and ability needed to survive in the wilderness in varied ecozonic conditions. And you're miserable only when you purposely do what? Stupid things, make mistakes, or have bad luck. For survival, you do not have to be miserable, right? I have sadly seen people training to be miserable and achieving their aim. And you know, it's great to achieve an aim, right? Well, I've achieved that aim, right? In the Army, we achieved lots of those kind of aims. None of them made any sense, but you know, we achieved those aims, right? So, Personally, I can just skip all that silliness. And I think we should, as outdoor educators, we should, as enthusiasts in bushcraft and northern bushcraft and wilderness survival, because you don't have to be that way. Now, of course, there is no absolutes, and conditions vary. So in reality, it's complications that make a survival situation nasty. Now, complications you can't really prepare for. That's the problem, right? I'm not going to run around with an arm tied behind my back trying to replicate that I've had a broken arm. That's just silly. But think, and anybody who take my courses will know this story already, think of the worst case of food poisoning you ever had. What did you want to do? Come on, you all know it. You want to curl up in a ball and die, right? So now it's 40 below and you're stuck out in the wilderness. What are you going to do with food poisoning when you curl up in a ball? Oh, you will die. Yeah. That's a complication. That's what makes it nasty. Therefore, practice in varied conditions and learn things that really work. Remember that many things work in good conditions, but fail in poor conditions and poor ecozones. So often we go out and we find the best, perfect mixed forest to do our training in, which is a shame, because when I go out and teach at other places, I've never seen that forest again. Right? It's just, I really like, oh yeah, it's so bad. Right, so there also is varied gear, and many opinions on gear, and fancy commercial gear may not always be the best. Because here, this Morrow Pro C for 20 bucks is one of the best survival knives in the world. Right? There's nothing like it. And you go, well, but I paid $200 on it, Bob. That's great. But it's not better, it's just you paid $200. Now, if you had some guy custom hand make it for you, it'd be a nicer knife. You'd have a lot of feeling for that. And I have no feeling for this knife at all. Right? So there's a difference. But there's not a difference in terms of what that knife will do for me when I'm stuck out in the forest. But more importantly, I own 6 of them. So even if I forget this, there's one in the back of my car, I stick knives in all sorts of places, and it's all packed away here and there. You should not do that. Right. So, next with that, the 3 R's. We all hear about that. Reduce, recycle, reuse. And that applies to all gear purchases, anything you use in the wilderness. So look at this thing. What's this? It's a parachute, right? But it's recycled material. It's done. You can't parachute with it anymore. Well, unless you're an idiot, right? I mean, I shouldn't say that. There's a YouTube video somewhere, some guy parachuting with a super shelter, right? But probably dead at the end of the video, right? But you know, his parents did well out of that later, right? You know, from the video money. But this is recycled material, and we can use this recycled material, and it's very, very high tech, and it makes our life incredibly good if we understand what it does. If we don't understand the physics of it, then we're in a bit of trouble, right? So, take along robust clothing and equipment that can survive damage and wear along the way. Not cheap junk that will fall apart the first time you use it, or when it really gets cold. So when I look around and say, hey, you know, I want a good pair of wool pants, I'll take real pants that aren't going to fall apart in the first day. And I'll actually do it in wool, right? If I want a metal water bottle, I'll get a stainless steel metal water bottle, not a plastic bottle. Because when I get stuck out there, it's just junk, right? So there's a limit in terms of what you can take, but you don't have to be dumb about it. There's lots of good gear around. Now, what I consider the first principle of modern wilderness survival. Survival is the art of minimal investment for maximum return. But to use that, you need to understand science and nature. You also have to use your brains, right? And discard a few myths and old wives' tales. And you go, oh, no. Survival myths, they're all done. I don't think so. So in preparing for this keynote, being computer savvy, I got on my analytics for boreal.net, my website, and I looked at a 30-day period. And I found that the 8th most common reason people found my website in Google was not typing in the best cool survival course in Canada. Nobody did that, strangely enough, other than me, just to see what would show up. But does eating snow dehydrate you? And in that case, in 30 days, 1,575 people found the Boreal website doing that. Which you go, well, that's a myth. Of course it's a myth. Because it's not snow by the time it gets to your stomach. It's water. So you're done. Like, you can't be dehydrated by having water. It's just impossible, right? But if you work that number out, it's 18,900 a year. Now, of that, about 17,000 are Canadian. So 17,000 people over the last 365 days got up in the morning on Google and typed in, does eating snow dehydrate you? That should scare you all. So it doesn't mean we've done a great job of educating. Because when people are still asking those kind of questions, that's a lot of silliness around. And that's what we have to overcome. So, using your brains in science, I'm going to stick with my friend the snowshoe hare, or the snowshoe rabbit, whatever you want to call him, right? He's a common, widespread little animal, tasty, but all the way from Newfoundland to Labrador, all the way up into Alaska, down in the United States, in every single province and territory, somewhere that gentlemen and ladies live, right? They're all over the place. There's almost all of Canada. So when we talk about a rabbit, that's generally what we're talking about. Now, Survivor Man, Les Stroud, in one of his great famous episodes, goes up north somewhere, and he spends 3 days, puts out 20 snares, and tries to get one rabbit, which he finally got one little miserable little dude at the end. Right now, that was hours of effort. You could say maybe not a lot of skill, maybe a lot of skill, depending on what you want to give him credit for, but you get one. And unfortunately, what's the problem with rabbits? You have to have what? The right conditions. Because there's times where you get no rabbits, and there's times when rabbits are really easy. And if you trained when it was really easy, what was your problem? You're done. Now, here's the problem. The snowshoe hare, anybody know how many calories a snowshoe hare has? On average, 875 kilocalories. That means for me, just to survive, I need to eat 3 rabbits doing nothing. So living in this room, I need 3 rabbits just to feed the beast.
I'll go.
Yeah. So what's the problem? Hunting scrap game does not work, however tasty it is. You ain't going to live off squirrels, you're not going to live off rabbits. Right? Stroud burned his BMR, which is probably at least 2,000 calories, and I'm sure another 4,000 calories most of the days on his northern shows. And you can't keep that silliness up and survive. So, consider the first principle again. In survival, that means you can't hunt or gather unless you get more calories than you burn hunting, gathering, skinning, and preparing the meat or plants. That's it. You can never work on a deficit. Right? You can't eat 100 calories and cost you 200 for it. Because you might as well just sat in your camp and watch the fire burn. Because you're doing better. Right? But it's not as exciting. So, remember the hunting-gathering cultures, most of whom were nomadic or semi-nomadic, could not afford to carry much with them. That is why they're way better at understanding than any farming culture how to survive while stranded in the wilderness. They lived in family groups on their lands, but they survived only when in trouble, separated, or stranded. Right? But they had that feast or famine, or feed or fast mentality. And that's why they always can do better. We can't do that because we have to break that. We have to break 8,000 years of the Fertile Crescent farming package stuff down our brains. Which is great, but I look around here and I haven't found the Indus Valley anywhere. And there's not a lot of that hanging around here when we get stuck in the woods. So, with that, I also want to mention a little extra little thing here. And that is something we always have to think about in terms of survival, but in terms of all outdoor education, which is your total environmental footprint. Right? Why do I want to mention that? Well, when we teach, need to think about a few things in our environmental ethics. One would be species survival. Next is fire safety, avoiding needless damage to the wilderness, and total environmental impact. Now, total environmental impact is really, really good. Where do you want the best to learn that? Read the Lorax. Right? But now, said the once-ler, now that you're here, the word of the Lorax seems perfectly clear. Unless someone like you cares a whole lot, nothing is going to get better, it's not. Now, Dr. Seuss was really smart, and I always think of that Lorax every time I want to grab another piece of true tinder fungus. Because I really don't want to be the dude that cut the last one off. And you say you can't do that. Some guy chopped the last tree down on Easter Island. Right? That species of tree doesn't exist anymore. So don't think we can't do that. Someone will come and get the last one. And then we just won't happen. And it happens all the time. Now, for us with fires, it's the important thing I want to talk about. Which is, Things like stick burners, no trace fires all help. But fire is not our enemy in the wilderness, except where we do what? Needlessly light them, leave them to burn, or do not understand fire hazard conditions in forests when we're traveling and living them. We need to go back to a holistic approach to wilderness travel and outdoor education. Return to the thinking of minimum impact in all but the most traveled wilderness areas. Remember, of course, who is the biggest supporters of no trace? The manufacturer of outdoor products. If you can tell me this is a no trace stove, you're insane. And I'll tell you what, see the fuel in there? How do you get this fuel? You ram out another cut line behind Randy and Lori's house. Then at the end of that cut line, make it close to his house so he can't sleep. Then what you do is you put a drill in there and you drill for a couple of weeks. Then when you're done, you set up a pump jack, put in a power line and a cut line and put in a pipeline and a road to monitor it. No. See this aluminum, where does it come from? Of course, it gets strip mined. So somewhere in the world, there's an aluminum strip mine. Big chunk of the Canadian Shield with a big hole. And where does the effluents go from your aluminum? Well, we don't know yet. Somewhere. So when you think about that, remember that fire is not our enemy, right? Fire is not the enemy unless we're silly. We can do that. Why? Because when I burn a fire, what does it do? It just returns nutrients to the soil. As long as I'm not stupid about it. You know, and people are. I mean, they see this unfortunately all the time. So, modern wilderness survival. Is it any different than survival? No, not really. It means thinking using modern materials. So things like this parachute and this lightweight plastic didn't exist, right, 100 years ago. So you can't expect them not to have figured out, hey, this in front of my shelter makes my shelter incredibly nice. But when I was a kid, we had big, heavy plastic, and it didn't work. Now we do. And if we understand what the parachute does, then suddenly we can build really nice shelters, right? So alongside a knowledge of science, nature, and biodegradable and renewable forest resources. Because that baton is fully refundable to the forest. I can throw it in the fire, using it as a tool, burn it, and that nutrients will go back to the soil. Right? Done. And it'll grow back. Right? I mean, you know, you can say, well, you know, oil will grow back. You know, we just need, like, you know, 1 million years and a few dinosaurs. We're fine. I haven't seen a lot of those either. So, with that, northern bushcraft. So what's what we really all came to learn, right? So, northern bushcraft skills work along with survival skills to make you more comfortable in the wilderness. But don't be thinking that all of them require higher levels of skill. They don't. Some of them do, some of them don't. Right? There's a balance in there. Now, remember, your ability to survive, it doesn't matter how good your bushcrafting skills are, because it's crafting, right? I mean, you still have to be able to survive. It does not matter what there. So you start with one and you work your way up. Now, when you have those extra skills, what's the bonus? Well, you're more comfortable and better off, and it's easier for you to do your work. Now, I'm going to spend a couple minutes talking about a few different bushcraft projects that you might learn. One is a pretty easy one, staff. Why? Well, you can say I just grab a stick, but that's survival. So a staff would teach you what? How to select wood, when to select wood, how to peel bark. You'd have to start to understand the forest. How about the Roycraft ski shoe, Kelly?
That's a great example. Selection of material and walking around, and for sure bark removal, but little things like how to remove the twigs without taking the tree down first before you take the tree down. A myriad of knots. Some of the skill with removing the bark, you build knife hand strength and the ability to control the depth of your knife, which later translates into the ability to make nice feather sticks. The semantics of putting the ski shoe together, some things about structural. You'll learn how to, different ways to attach them to your feet and learn how to walk on them. So you learn things about everything from lamp wicks to tire tubes, just tons of things.
Yeah, and I'd actually focus on one right there that he said. Thank you, Kelly. That is, a myriad of knots is required to do a proper Roycraft ski shoe. But for survival, we can get by with 4 knots. But when you start to craft, suddenly all these knots and all this lashing and all this other cool stuff actually becomes useful. Right? You don't need to survive, but boy, it's real cool when you can do it right. Right? So next one would be, in my case, the replacement for this. Building an improvised bow saw, right? I call it a second-day saw, right? Where you build something fancier than a little stick with a bow blade, right? And with a 15-minute saw. So it's real skill that it takes there. And it's really nice. But I'd also mention another one. Number 4, you might be a little surprised at. I think it's one of the most underrated tools we have. We just take advantage of it, and that's called the shovel. And it's really a shame we don't have a shovel workshop tomorrow, because I was going to point out everyone should be in it. Right? The first shovel known by archaeologists is over 100,000 years old. And it was a scapula of some beast, you know, a moose or something, sharpened up, so they could actually cut with it and shovel. And I've tried the improvised shovels. They're really hard. I was hoping to learn something tomorrow, because it's like, oh, mine were all horrible, right? But you don't understand how much steel improves things until you stop and say, okay, how do I do that? Oh, that's a shame, right? Next one is kind of neat, number 5. This one Morse taught me. And you go, well, that kind of looks like the piston of a bow drill, but there's some weird thing stuck in the top of it. And that's an old nail, and that turns it into a drill. And you can't build drills in the wilderness. It just doesn't work. But you might have to drill. So when we start talking about tools, we take the sexy tools and leave all the rest behind and pull those out of the workshop, which is kind of a problem, right? And the last one is almost the opposite to the staff in terms of the skills it teaches.
Just so you're aware. So that kind of stuff is important with your selection and wood and stuff.
All right, thank you, Brian. I like to think of the spoon as the microwave. When we go for the staff, we wander out the forest, we go to the spoon, we start to select and look at wood, right? So then that also leaves us with bushcraft study areas. Probably the first one you could think of is fire. Fire is cool, but learn your survival skills. Learn those basic bushcraft skills and then move on. But if you want to do something, look at that. That is the most incredible fire set I've ever seen. That's an Inuit mouth drill. I can't believe how easy that was. It was just, I was blown away when I went down to,
Basically?
No.
Inuit? Resolute?
No, Inuit, no, I learned that down in Idaho.
Rabbit stick.
Rabbit stick, yeah, I'm from a guy from California, of course. That would make perfect sense, right? And, but it was great, it was amazing, like 1 minute fire, done. Perfect, best ember I've ever seen. It's like, that's too simple. Right? Just amazing. Right? And you can see why you'd have this in our forest, because resources are finite. Right? Big bow drilling is all cool, but you can see where the Inuit wouldn't have done it at all, because where's the bush? You know, you look at this thing, there's nothing there. And that's why it works so well. So there's fire. We have medicinal plants, but don't learn medicinal plants if you're not going to learn the wilderness first aid and everything else to do with it. It's useless to know that that plant will do X if you don't know how to make it into medicine and use that medicine, right? And what you'd actually do in the wilderness. If not, you might as well not bother. Just go back to the hospital, right? Edible plants, which are almost none of our diet out here, like less than 5%, right? Which means we're going to be hunting and fishing. And that means you might as well learn how to hunt big game and how to do fish traps and gill netting and everything else, right? Because that's what we're going to do. And that leads us right into long-term survival skills, which would be things like what? Long-term living, working with wood stoves, working with good shelters, and homesteading skills. Think about this. How many people here have ever dug a well? Okay, that's good. Now, how many of you dug a well by hand? Wow, that's good, because I read an article on it and I almost cried going, oh, that looks just horrible. It didn't seem like an easy skill I'd want to do. Yeah, absolutely. But you don't learn those ones, then you got a problem. Right? And that gives us to food preservation and agriculture and craft skills. But the interesting thing to think about, the beautiful Fertile Crescent farming package that took over the world, right? Literally did. You know, their base crops and domestic animals and craft skills, what did they have to learn first? Anybody know? Really, really important, because we didn't think about this.
Trees.
No, there was no trees in Iraq and Syria, so they didn't have to care about that, right? That's where they developed, well, there's trees, just not enough of them.
Irrigation.
No. First skill they had to learn was pottery. Without pottery, there's nowhere to put your seeds till you can store them over the winter and plant them again in the spring. So this is where we get this idea that, you know, you've done all this and, you know, guys planting and then they learn these other crafting skills. No, they had to learn pottery. First thing they had to learn, first crafting skill. I mean, it led to metal and germs and all the rest of the stuff that became this great package we had. But that's the kind of stuff they had to learn. And often we're backwards with this. We're kind of learning one or the other. So if anybody here is a potter, good job. You had a real survival skill to restart civilization. Right? Just keep some seeds, though, you know, because there's none on the prairies. Right? I thought I'd mention that to you. So, what if you had to survive being stranded? Well, rare, robust, tough clothing made to survive in the wilderness. carry redundant critical survival items, especially fire lighting items. So when I build a fire lighting kit, I'll have 2 or 3 ways to light a fire, not one. I don't take chances. Leave stupid chances and drinking your urine to survival TV personalities. Right? What do we want to do? We want to learn, read, listen, and watch everything we can from everybody we can study with. Do not limit your learning to those who think your way or specialize in those same skills. This is why gatherings like Frostbite are so important, because that synergy really exists and it really works. And we should continue in our practice of sharing. It's one of the things we're really, really good at in this province, sharing those skills. But you can't just keep them all in a box. It just doesn't work that way. But more importantly, most of the skills we have been again and again and again improved, or in some cases, again and again, brought back to what people used 1,000 years ago and we've forgotten about. Right, that might be closer to the truth, right? Since we didn't invent nothing when it comes to that, right? So practice whenever and wherever you can. And remember that skills practiced at 20 degrees C on a nice summer day are not the same as practice in minus 40 degrees in snow and cold and wind. Right, that's different. And my advice is don't start training at minus 40. Although that might be a good plan, you might want to give that option as a little poor, right? And finally, when you're in trouble, stop, think, orientate, and plan. Right? Stop what you're doing, think about the situation, say, oh, well, I guess I'm out here. Look around at the environment and make a plan. All right. So, last thing I want to do is, David did ask me to talk a little bit about this, my book. And so I'm going to spend a couple of minutes. Now, I thought about it for a while, and I thought of 5 things that are most important about this book. Number 1, it took a long time to write. Okay? And so if you're going to write a book, think little steps, right? And I started with a 25-page manual in 1994. Most of which I stole from Morris completely, like photocopies and photocopies, right? Right? So this has improved, right? Morris can say, Bruce, you did a much better job than your original one, right? This is also a product of hundreds of nights in the boreal forest and mountains. And numerous trips, and this is probably the biggest one, numerous trips to remote locations to teach where I could not scout my location before arrival. This was really life-changing. When I got off a plane in a place like Norman Wells, and they said, okay, well, I'll teach the class, and where are we going? Oh, well, we need a forest. Okay, anybody know a good mixed forest? Well, I think there's one down the like, Mackenzie River. So we get in snowmobiles and drive for 20 kilometers, get up, no, it looks good. But, of course, you don't have a choice. That's just where you are. And so what I found was that lack of control. Because we're used to teaching in a very, very controlled environment. Everything's perfect. Well, that was great, but I threw out about half the skills I used to teach as soon as I actually started to do that without that control. And what it did is it amplified simplicity and basic fundamental skills. The other one, there it is. This little dude here, a good digital camera that could actually take pictures in the cold and when there was high humidity. This changed that book and created that book. Without digital photography, nothing would look like that. I just wouldn't have been able to do it. I wouldn't have the 10,000 pictures I got to pick from. Right? That's how it happened. So, also a delay in production actually improved the pictures and the overall content of the book. And so being in a rush doesn't actually help you. Trying to get your book out next week may be a little hard. A few extra weeks or months or years, it better have a better book, right? Also, I got to sit back numerous times and look at it like I was a student, not the author, and that really helped. I also got to look at inconsistencies, missing items that I often took for granted. But of course, I didn't find them all, so you don't have to worry about that. I've already found a couple mistakes, and there's always going to be stuff you missed. So, number 3, take lots of pictures in the field when you're doing things, both mundane and interesting, because that's a problem. So today, me and Ted were out setting up a little bit of stuff, and what did I take the picture of? Not the crane, because I got a bunch of those crane pictures, and we won't have a pot on it anyhow, but I took a picture of the base we were making on green logs, so we won't have a fire scar. And that's interesting, because I've thought about that, I didn't have a picture of that, right? Because I just never bothered to take a picture of it, because it's too basic. Yeah, until you get back, and you want to put pictures in, and you have nothing, right? So, number 4, hardest part of the book when you write is not what you put in the book, but what you leave out. Right? 450 pages, you figure I could tell everybody the survival, not a chance. Right, there's only 15 shelters in here and 50 pages. Really. I mean, there's a few other ones I mentioned, but there's only 15 or 16 shelters or whatever I actually teach you how to build. So I could put another 50 pages of shelter building in it, easily 20 pages of fire lighting, without even a thing, except that then I'd be getting close to the size of the book. Because there's some limit of how much you can stuff in pages. Lastly, number 5, I owe a huge debt of gratitude to those people I taught alongside and learned from. That includes, of course, Morris, who I have a huge debt to, but also Rick Tyre, my first survival instructor, in a really good scientific bent. Right? There's a lot of people around teaching that's really, really good. But also Carmen, Ditzler, and Greg Perry, who unfortunately moved to BC, they were really good survival instructors. Carmen was one of the girls I canoed on my 3-month canoe trip with. And they had some real skills, and it was nice to teach with them. And it was a varied environment. I like that. Along with John Caldwell, who was my first partner. And so that when we found the Boreal Wilderness Institute, it wasn't just me. Except he couldn't eat. Well, actually, he could eat. It's just his kids were starving. So that ended his relationship with me and as a business partner, right? Because there's just no money for it. And Jim Hawley. So the other people that I have a huge credit debt to is that numerous and enthusiastic students, some of who are out in this crowd right now, who really make a big difference. I found that the harder those students pushed, the more questions they asked, the more I had to actually do things. Because I couldn't skate. Because when you don't have an answer to something, it's all bad, right? And with that, thank you very much, and I can take questions.
What was the name of that fire drill technique?
This is an Inuit mouth drill.
Mouth drill?
Mouth drill. Yeah, so you can see it has a little pad here, you hit your mouth, and you'll notice in mine there's got a little piece of silver stuffed in the bottom so it doesn't wear out. And then this is the piston, and then this is this is the bottom. That's the whole thing. That's the entire package. And there's just a piece of rawhide, which is all you need. And literally, you just run. Once you learn the angle kind of thing, that's the only thing I marked up in the beginning was just the angle. And of course, like anything, like any bow drilling, cutting those notch ends properly is the entire skill. Right, so if they're not right, then you're done, right? As you would know. Just complete out of business. All right, any more? Questions? Bueller? At least some.
Where can people pick up your book?
Oh, yeah, if you're looking for the book, Randy and Lori have it at the Karamat store, and if by chance they run out, I have 5 more boxes in the back of my truck. So don't worry, and I will be happy to sign it. And and take more questions after if there's more. If you
Last chances? More questions?
Last chance.
Well,
Art.
you opened up the question of making a business of this set of skills that you have. And we have a number of people here who've got businesses. I know there's a lot of students here, and this is really not their purview, but it'd be nice to have a little round of saying what the difficulties are and how you address them.
Well, I would say that when I went to the U of A and took my outdoor education, I don't know how many of them, 20 classes, 30 classes, whatever a degree is, right? Only one of them was on business. And really, being smart would have had 2 classes on outdoor education and 15 on business. Yeah. Right, taking a business degree and then opening up an outdoor shop would have been a lot smarter idea. Because so much of it is administration and web running and social media and all these other things, but it's, you can lose half your customers because they don't get a hold of you. Right? That was the big thing, learning all that administration and all the sales. And, because I do a lot of industry cold calling, which I hate completely and profusely, right? But walking into places and saying, hey, do you guys actually want a survival course? Do you want a wildlife awareness course? It's great when they come to me. It's much easier. But if you just hung up your shingle and waited for people to come to you, there'd be no business. Right? And that's one of those problems. And a lot of times we know the skill, but the best thing I ever heard about that is the skill in your business is 1/3. So I'm great at doing whatever, so that's 1/3 of my business. And then I have to be good at administration, that's another 1/3, and good at sales, which is another 1/3. Unless somehow you have 3 people in the shop. Well, what's the problem with that? No one wants to pay that much for outdoor education. So now you've got a problem, right? Either you have to have a job on the side, and then, of course, that job on the side gets in the way of doing cool stuff. And it really affects your lifestyle. Because you don't get to the woods as much, right? So your problem with that is it really is a balance. And we tend to have a problem in outdoor education, which is a lot of people have a tendency to think it should be free. Right? And I think that's wrong. I mean, like, how much advice do you get for free from a lawyer? I know a lot of lawyers, and they don't pen out a lot of free advice. Right? But, you know, somebody asked me that. I said, what kind of advice would you give for free? Right? And I had 4 of them, right? Is don't set your clothes on fire, don't party naked in the snow, don't eat yellow snow, and there was some other thing I gave them. And they said, well, that's all crappy advice. I said, yeah, but you're not paying me anything. If you're paying me something, I'll tell you something useful, you know? You know, I mean, look around here. There's a huge level of talent in this room. Really, really good talent. But it's very hard to make a living. You know, Morris lived on like $15,000, $16,000 a year trying to feed his family. Right? You know, I mean, I dedicate this book to my dad because, you know, he fed me an awful lot of food over the years, you know, when I was older than I should have had to skip off him, right? There was years that things weren't as good as they are now, right? You know, and that's life. But the thing to think about is, if you want to do it, just go back and think about a business plan. And, you know, for mine, it's seats or bums in the seat. That's the plan. I have to bring a certain number of people in every month to the Boreal Wilderness Institute or go somewhere, right? And for me, that's about 30 a month. And if I can't get those, I'm out of business. Or it's a bad year, right? And so, you know, some years like 2017, oh yeah, rolled right by it. Some years, like the year 2000, after Y2K, you couldn't sell a survival course for love or money. You know, there was the little tumbleweeds heading by the classroom door. Look at that. I wonder if I can use a tumbleweed for a crafting project. Or maybe eat it, right? Because, you know, things were getting a little thin.
Like
Right?
wheat.
Yeah. Is that? Oh, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I'm going to hit you a little deeper here. What is your reality for this business?
Reality is in...
Yeah, like, do you pay the bills?
Oh, yeah. But I pay the bills by teaching field workers. So I teach wildlife awareness and vehicle survival and all sorts of stuff that isn't pure, like 3 hours and stuff like that, and driving all over the province and all over Western Canada, right? So I teach a lot. I go up to places like McLean Lake and fly in and teach field workers like survival there. But that's because you have to be really, for a company to want to pay me to teach you overnight, teach a day in the classroom, teach 3 or 4 days in some of these ones, you've got to be pretty remote for them to want to do that. And they also don't want to learn how to bow drum, because they're just field workers who are going to get stuck overnight, know that the helicopter won't come back one day, and they know that the quad will break down or the snowmobile will break down and it'll be 40 below, and they'll be, oh, I need to light a fire. And that's, you know, so I teach a lot of that. And it's cool teaching, but it's not as neat as doing 2-week backpacking trips through the Rockies or something, or, you know, canoeing the Churchill River. But unfortunately, that doesn't pay a lot of money, right? And, you know, it's like, you know, someone said, you know, like, you know, when I used to offer like 8- and 10-day trips for that, or for survival. But what I found was almost no one wanted to take them. And so mostly the only people that took them were people who wanted to go into competition with me. So I thought after a while that maybe, you know, maybe I should do less of these, right? Because it's not actually helping me out much. But more importantly, there just wasn't a lot of people. So some of the coolest courses I had were like 2 people, right? But that doesn't pay the bills, right? And so I'd much prefer having 16 in the middle of Nowheresville, you know, and fly in and all this stuff and, you know, move in. That's great work. It's not quite as fun. It kind of depends on where it is, right?
Thank you for addressing that. If any of the other people here want to address the same question, I'd love to hear what you have to say, and I'm sure others would too.
Yeah, you guys can corner me all weekend. Tomorrow afternoon I'll be cooking. Me and Ted are going to do a little cooking out in the woods. And I think there's some signed a new one now on Sunday morning. I'm going to do a tripod lean-to, which is a kind of cool lean-to you can build anywhere, which is why with just a few sticks instead of having to have trees and everything else. Perfect. So we'll do that. But the rest of the time I'll be hanging around. So I'm happy to talk about that. I'm always happy to share in the idea of that synergy. I really, really believe in it. You know, where we have to cooperate. As a matter of fact, I was just talking today and about that same thing, about how, you know, we all pay more liability insurance because we can't organize ourselves. We all spend extra money instead of using it to eat or pay the rent to do things, or try to run around and run our businesses without liability insurance because we can't cooperate. And a lot of times cooperation, people think, oh, cooperation has to be, you know, this is the skill you're going to teach in your level 1 course. Well, that's not relevant. Figure out your own curriculums. That's not what an organization would do, but an organization would get together and share its liability insurance and figure out what basic standards like first aid and things that we need for our instructors and all that kind of stuff. That's what we'd actually do, right? But I also believe that here we do an awful lot of cooperation. I think that's good. We do need to do more of that. Because no one person will have all the skills. It ain't going to happen. Because by the time you stick it all in this side, it'll leak out that side. Right, there's only so much. So that, you know, and I look around at guys that have incredible skills in one or the other areas. It's like, wow, that's kind of neat. I actually enjoy watching Brian carve spoons. It's kind of cool. He's way better. My spoons don't look like that at all, right, you know? Most of the best spoons I had to actually burn with coals to get them out because you couldn't actually get it round right. So I'll just burn that for a while.
He's giving you cedar.
No cedar in my forest.
Any more? All right, let's thank Bruce.